Good afternoon. It is Thursday, 29th of July, back in the Reading Nook on what is UK Games Expo Eve. A big gaming convention here in the UK starts tomorrow. Really looking forward to going and catching up with some friends and essentially just seeing how the hobby has fared over the last 2 years. I will be going masked. I will be adhering to all of the regulations, they're basically and conditions for attending. And basically, I think the good news is that I am COVID free according to my tests, and I've got all the jabs. In the meantime, it is a pleasantly warm, bright afternoon. A little bit of a wind about, and I've got a nice cup of tea. And of course, I have a book to unbox. Or in that case, unwrap. Now I know what this is, because and it's a non-role-playing book, but I can promise you that it will be of interest if you have any interest in the hobby or history. What we have got here, it's a book by Tim Harford. And the book is 50 Things That Made the Modern Economy by Tim Harford. This is an interesting book for a number of reasons, which I'll explain. So, who thought up paper money? How did the contraceptive pill change the face of the legal profession? What was the secret element that made the Gutenberg printing press possible? The world economy defies comprehension. A continuously changing system with immense complexity, it offers over 10 billion distinct products and services, doubles in size every 15 years, and links almost every one of the planet's 7 billion people. It delivers astonishing luxury to hundreds of millions. It also leaves hundreds of millions behind, puts tremendous strains on the ecosystem, and has an alarming habit of stalling. Nobody's in charge of it. Indeed, no individual understands more than a fraction of what's going on. How can we make sense of this bewildering system on which our lives depend? From the tally stick to the barcode, concrete to cuneiform, each invention in Tim Harford's fascinating new book has its own curious, surprising and memorable story. A vignette against a grand backdrop. Step by step, readers will start to understand where we are, how we got here, and where we might be going next. Hidden connections will be laid bare. How the barcode undermined family corner shops, why the gramophone widened inequality, and how barbed wire shaped America. We'll meet the characters who developed some of these adventures, profit from them, and all were ruined by them. We'll trace the economic principles that will help to explain the transformative effects, and we'll ask what lessons we can learn to make wise use of future inventions in a world where the pace of innovation will only accelerate. So let's look at a couple of things interesting about this. So first off, Tim Harford. Now, Tim Harford is best known in the UK at the moment for doing a podcast on Radio 4 called More or Less, where he addresses statistics and their use and misuse from one week to the next. And if you've got any interest in contemporary affairs, politics, that sort of thing, then it's a really interesting show. Available, basically does it on Radio 4, then he's got a regular podcast on the World Service, and it's well worth a listen. He is also a well-known role player. He's perhaps, I would think, outside of the hobby, he's probably one of the most well-known role players in the country. Basically, he has written about board gaming, and he has also tweeted a little about role playing, not a huge amount, just a bit. It's mostly the gaming group he plays with that tweets a bit more. And then fans of the Grognard Files will recognise the name from the Grognard Files podcast, where he was a very recent guest. Essentially, Dirt the Dice interviewed him about his role-playing history and his role-playing habits now. And it's all very interesting listen, and I will put a link down below to that podcast. So, 50 Things That Made the Modern Economy. Now, back in about 2010, Neil McGregor of the British Museum got together with Radio 4 and did a long-running series of 100 episodes called the world History of the World in 100 Objects, and in each case you take a particular object and examine its significance in world history and its effect upon its culture and upon us and so on. And it's a really interesting series. It's available as a podcast. You can still find it on Radio 4 or Sounds, and that would lead to two things: a book, World in 100. The History of the World in 100 Objects, and then also in sort of like a spate of books that did the same thing. So the something of the world in something objects. Like History of the World in 100 Weapons was one, for example. So a little sort of like ripple of books that followed a small trend. Move on sort of 6 years or so, and Tim Harford does basically halves the task and does 50 things. But 50 things that made the modern economy, and this is the resulting book. That was 2016. Did a book podcast, so you deal with things like the plough, the gramophone, barbed wire. So you have a history of barbed wire in 6 pages. Or seller feedback in a similar pages. So it's short chapters, really readable, lots of different things you didn't think about. The Billy bookcase, okay, it's a constant subject, a topic of conversation. What shelves do you use to store your role-playing game books? Okay, or your books, and the Billy bookcase has entered, culture. Basically, our society is part of culture. It's something that we occasionally talk about. It's a joke. It's a reference. For your information, I would probably think the majority of my role-playing books are stored on Kallax shelving, and it's very sturdy. Takes a lot of books, and I still don't have enough of them. We have subject after subject. So cuneiform, public key and cryptography, double entry bookkeeping, management consulting, and again management consulting in basically 3.5, 4 pages. And that's probably for most people about as much as you really want to read about management consulting. But that's enough. You don't need to know anymore. You're going to get a story about it. You're going to get, where did it come from? What does it do? What effects has it had on our society? And as I say, he does this again and again in 50 short chapters. And there's also notes at the back. Most of the references, essentially this is a piece of research. And then, of course, later on in 2019, he did a second series, 50 More Things That Made the Economy, and he did exactly the same thing, but again on another 50 things. So he's done, essentially, his 100 things that made the modern economy. I still think the podcast might be available on Sounds. You might have to dig around for it, see whether it's available. It's been repeated at least a couple of times, and if you've not heard it, definitely worth a listen. And I think the great thing about this is you could take this, read it, you might come up with some ideas or elements you can add to a role-playing game if you really wanted to. Just inspiration and interesting reading. Now, why have I got copies of this? Well, it's not to read. It is, in fact, as a birthday gift for my father, who will be 77 next month, in a few days. And I wanted to buy him something interesting to read, and which I know would interest him. It deals with history and economics and so on, but in short bursts, because he's going to be 77. So yeah, I hope he's got to ship these ship this and a copy of 50 More Things That Made the Economy to Wales for his birthday. So. I think basically this is probably a nice book to have on your shelf, just as a reference book of ideas, especially if you're doing modern gaming, because essentially there's a lot of modern things, but it does do the past as well. So obviously cuneiform might be worth looking at if you're playing basically Mithras, the Mithras supplement for Babylon, for example. But I'm not quite sure how you would use double entry bookkeeping in your role-playing game, but honestly, if you do, well done. So yeah, that is 50 things that made the modern economy. Probably easy to track down a copy of the paperback as much as it is the hardback, but I thought, the hardback's always nicer. So in the meantime, if you've enjoyed this unboxing in the Nook, then please do click the like button down below. And if you've got any comments or feedback, I appreciate you taking the time to read to make those, and I do read them. And lastly, of course, if you want to be alerted to yet more unboxings in the Nook, in which you'll see me with parcel, book, probably more likely a role-playing book than just a book that I'm giving to my father, or indeed just a random book which I think is interesting. And lastly, not forgetting a nice hot cup of tea, then please hit that subscribe button. In the meantime, thank you again for watching another unboxing in the Nook. If you've enjoyed this, I appreciate it, and I'll be back very soon with another unboxing. Bye for now.